Macroeconomist Lyn Alden predicts the Bitcoin price to 10x from here, virtually meaning a $280,000 Bitcoin price action. She was recently interviewed on Kitco News just a couple of days ago, and I transcribed the highlights from her interview. So let's break this baby down, shall we? A massive shout out to everyone in the live chat. This is the video. If you want to watch her whole interview, it's actually a two-part series. And as you can see here, U.S. government shutdown November, impact on the economy, U.S. gold and Bitcoin with Lyn Alden. But like I said, I took all the highlights for your convenience, and here's what she had to share. Way that markets work in terms of money, especially on the global scale, is that over time, people want to get out of weaker monies as they can. And if there's all this kind of fencing that kind of keeps them in, but technology is way too kind to break through that. And so it is when we see kind of these countries fail, like these currencies fail, they generally don't return to the gold standard. If anything, they dollarize. That's usually their go-to. And so we generally see that as developing countries have currency problems and developing currencies kind of get inroads in there. And the big question is, what happens when eventually these major developed currencies fail or begin to have their kind of ongoing inflationary spiral in a similar way to what you see in an emerging market? So basically, when their debt level gets so high, when their interest expense is completely untenable, when we have an energy shortage, for example, and you see kind of just money printing from these central banks, what happens then? Great question. What is the apex predator, aka Bitcoin, that comes after then in a similar way that the dollar comes after? Argentina comes after Lebanon. What comes after these major currencies when they eventually start to have problems? Great question. And really, the only two options I think are gold or Bitcoin. In a world where Bitcoin was never invented, gold would be the only possible fallback mechanism to recapitalize the system, reset, and unfortunately, probably build the whole system all over again. You probably would fraction reserve gold again and kind of repeat this cycle over the next century. I don't know. Bitcoin presents another path we can take that the question then becomes, will Bitcoin remain secure and decentralized enough to kind of hold that burden? I think so. It's scarcer than gold in the sense that, as you know, lower terminal supply, so eventually zero inflation compared to gold's on average 1.5% inflation per year. Preach. Bitcoin is also portable, so you can bring it around the world with you. You can memorize 12 words, and you can bring all of your Bitcoin with you. Preach. Whereas if you try to bring dollars or gold through the airport, you're going to be pretty restricted in how much you can legally bring through the practically bring through, so that the portability and that extra scarceness gives it a really powerful advantage. But of course, it is relying on the global telecommunications system. It is reliant on being able to survive against potential attacks or bugs. And so it is nowhere. We are still less than 15 years into Bitcoin's existence. And I think every kind of cycle that goes through is another test to see how resilient it is, to the extent that if Bitcoin does not break, if Bitcoin cannot be captured or defeated in some way, I would expect it to continue capturing market share. And then should whatever reason it fail, gold is still the fallback option. It is something that, you know, the power goes out and you have gold, you still have your own bare asset money. So I still think gold has a role even in a Bitcoin future. And the main question between gold or Bitcoin comes down to, can nation states break Bitcoin? Can someone try to find a way to break Bitcoin? Will Bitcoin ever fall from its own incentive structure? Like, will whatever kind of centralized in a way that damages it? And if not, I think it continues taking the market share. That's right, the apex predator dominates, fam. In a world where Bitcoin is successful, large institutions are going to own chunks of it. Eventually, even the central banks would own it. We could have a Bitcoin standard. Preach. And over time, I think it's one of those things. If any one entity were to own, say, 20% of Bitcoin, I find that very concerning, because if there were kind of attempts at forks and things like that, they'd have a lot of pricing power to help determine which fork can win. But if an entity has a few percentage of the Bitcoin network, I don't view that as an attack on Bitcoin. In general, the scarcer an asset is, the faster it can be withdrawn. The harder it is to build large paper markets over it. So one of the challenges with gold is that, as scarce and attractive as it is, the portability is limiting. The divisibility, the verification, is limiting. And so historically what happens is people want to hold their gold in vaults, and then it gets fraction reserved and rehypothecated, and that eventually breaks after decades. Eventually, entities like China or India just kind of keep taking the gold, and eventually things break, just like the central banks are hoarding gold right now. But that's usually a multi-decade process, whereas if you have something like Bitcoin, that can be withdrawn quicker. That's right, we have the power to, pull our keys. Every 10 minutes on average, the entire network is audited by the node network. You can bring Bitcoin out, it grows more slowly, has zero terminal inflation, that shrugs off attempts of rehypothecation and fractional reserves more quickly, the cycle years instead of decades. Bitcoin is kind of a binary outcome. Either it works tremendously well, or it probably doesn't work very much at all. It eventually stagnates and dies. So basically saying 20 years from now, does something kill it? Does nobody want to use it? Do people find something better? If so, then you're not going to have almost any volume, perhaps no volume. But on the other hand, listen up, folks. If Bitcoin continues to be successful, the volumes could be tremendous, and Bitcoin would be prospering in that regard. So at the 14-year mark into that, 14 years since Bitcoin's inception, the Bitcoin network does process trillions of dollars worth of Bitcoin transactional volume. Now, a lot of that is moving between the exchanges. A lot of that is people choosing to pull that into their own cold storage. Basically, you still have a lot of overall volume. It is not really yet for medium exchange purposes, but I think that's normal in this kind of early period of adoption where the price keeps going up, and that's where the capital gains taxes on any sale, which you might have. People have a natural tendency to hoard it and use it, that savings, and I think the fact that if you go back to 2010 and say this network is worth $500 billion, the current temporary Speaker of the House hosts the Bitcoin white paper on his website. He is actually a Bitcoin fan. Preach. We have had multiple political presidential candidates talking about Bitcoin. That's right. Kennedy Jr., DeSantis, etc. We have a nation that has adopted it as the second legal tender alongside the dollar. Shout out to Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. They have their own Bitcoin office. Preach. You have, the Kingdom of Bhutan was mining Bitcoin. We have some of the Middle Eastern countries getting into Bitcoin mining. We have trillions of dollars in transactional volume. So I do think that we are actually quite far along in that whole vision. When I picture 7 years from now, so Satoshi's 20-year mark, I do expect it to be further along. But when you kind of compare where the Bitcoin network is now and where it can go or what the competition is, we look at FedWire. So the Federal Reserve-based settlement system that settles, and this is not a typo, $1 quadrillion of settlement volumes per year. It was above 1 quadrillion. That's 1,000 trillions in gross settlement volume. So these numbers can reach extremely high volumes. Basically, what Bitcoin is a decentralized open source FedWire for the world. And so right now it is still tiny compared to the biggest ledger, which is the US dollar system, the FedWire system, the Euro dollar system built around that system. That's by far the biggest network. Bitcoin is nowhere near getting to that. And I think even in 7 years, it'll still be probably not in the same ballpark as the dollar system. But I do think in 7 years, Satoshi's 20-year mark, I do think Bitcoin could be another 10x here in terms of market cap, transaction volumes, and overall adoption. I do not think another order magnitude would be off the table in that time frame. And I think that'd be considered very successful for that time frame. So there you have it, coming directly from macroeconomist Lyn Alden. So what's 10x the market cap of Bitcoin from 500 billion, just north of where we are currently at? Then we're looking at, you run the math, I think that would be roughly $5 trillion market cap. And if we do the math, what is 10x the current price action? That's above $270,000 per Bitcoin. So let me know if you agree or disagree with the prediction from Lyn Alden. Make some noise in the comments right down below, which leads us to our next segment of the show, which is the live Q&A. I pulled up the YouTube chat live on your screen so you can interact. So make sure to say hello and get the shout out.